What's up, awesome YouTubers? Ryan1988 or Justin back here to do a video for you guys, and I'm finally here to do my top 25 favorite films from 2010 to 2019. Top 25, I was going to do top 50, narrowed it down to 25 movies, and these 25 movies are movies that I absolutely love, have watched several times, or movies that just had a really big impact on me. So I had a 25 list, I shared it on Instagram, and I wasn't 100% in love with it, so I had to go back and really think about it. So these films right here, even though some people will probably disagree with some of them, this is my top 25, and these are movies that I absolutely love, and I go back and, like I said, watch a lot, or, like I said, had a huge impact on me. But before I get to that, let me do some honorable mentions because there's some other great movies out there. And of course, I'm leaving out several other movies. Again, I was going to do like a top 50, maybe even top 100, but I just did the top 25 with some honorable mentions. So let's get to the honorable mentions and then we'll go to the 25 movies. The first honorable mention is Gone Girl. One of my favorite David Fincher movies, and I'm not a big David Fincher fan. There's only probably a handful movies that I own of his, and maybe there's like 4 movies of his that I like. But Gone Girl is definitely one of my favorites. I love this movie. Big fan of this one here. Seen it a couple times. Second time, I absolutely loved it. The first time, I really enjoyed it, but I went back 5 years later. 5 years later, not went back, but 5 years later, I went back and I watched it, and I love this movie. So, had to mention that, at least in the honorable mentions. The Star Wars movies, of course, I have to talk about these. I know some people don't like them. I love this new trilogy. I don't have Rise of the Skywalker, but I love them all. All of them are great, and I had to mention them at least. Not in my top 25, but movies that definitely had a big impact on me this past decade. So can't wait to own Rise of the Skywalker and own the complete trilogy on Blu-ray. So looking forward to that. A movie that came out in 2010 or 2011, I'm not sure what year, but it was in the beginning of the decade, and this movie came out and disappeared. No one really talks about it. I personally love it. That is Super 8. This is possibly my favorite J.J. Abrams movie. I love this. You know, I love the Star Trek movies. I love Force Awakens and Rise of the Skywalker. But for me, this is, again, probably my favorite J.J. Abrams movie. I love Super 8. Not a lot of people talk about this movie, and I feel like, you know, even though I love Stranger Things, that kind of really picked up, and people started, you know, kind of copying that, you know, the kind of 80s feel and like all the, you know, kid movies pretty much that we've been seeing nowadays. But Super 8 did it first, kind of brought that back with, you know, a mix of Goonies and E.T. and all these other classic, you know, kid movies out there. But Super 8, love that one. Definitely check it out if you've not seen it, and if you haven't seen it in a long time, go back and rewatch it. Had to add some animated movies, some cartoons on this, but they did not make my top 25, but these movies still had an impact on me. That is Toy Story 3. Have not seen 4 yet. I gotta go and watch it, but Toy Story 3, saw it in theaters. I cried. I love this movie though. I love all the Toy Story films, minus Part 4 because I haven't seen it yet. But yeah, Toy Story 3 was great. Great movie from the last decade. And the Lego Movie. Have not seen Lego Movie 2 yet. I own it. I have not watched it yet. But I want to go back and watch the first movie and then go and watch the second one. Seen this movie a couple times. Actually, I've seen it a few times. I'm sorry. I've had so much fun with this movie, and it was definitely one of the best films of the past decade. So, had to mention those two. Great animated movies. Of course, so many others are out there, but those are 2 of my favorites. This director I love. Of course, there's so many directors I love, but I feel like his movies are great. Each one of them have something different with them, and I kind of call it my unofficial trilogy of his works. Of course, he's going to make more movies, but he really did have a great influence this past decade. And I'm talking about Damien Chazelle, if I'm saying that correct, with Whiplash, La La Land, and First Man. I think First Man is underrated. It kind of came and went. No one really talks about it. I think it's a great movie. Simple story. My least favorite of his films, but I still love the movie. So that one I had to mention. La La Land, a movie that really grew on me. The first time I thought it was pretty good, but over time I've grown to love this film. And Whiplash, I loved right away. I feel like out of all three of his movies so far, this is the best one. So good. Love that movie. And then finally, my other honorable mentions to talk about are two comedies that came out this past decade. One came out a couple years ago, the other one came out last year. And I'm not 100% interested in a lot of new comedies because I feel like they all do the same thing. For me, these two movies stood out and I love them. I just absolutely love these films. The first one is Game Night. Great movie. I go to this movie quite a bit. And Long Shot. So this one really surprised me because, you know, I like raunchy comedies, but they kind of get tiresome because they do the same thing over and over. With Long Shot, and even Game Night, this one's a little bit raunchy, they did something different, and they did something special with that kind of genre of comedy. And with Long Shot, there was like a good message in it, you know, it's a love story in it, mixed with, you know, some raunchy humor, and it worked really well, and I thought it did something different. And Game Night did the same thing. It wasn't just a raunchy comedy, and in fact, I don't really think this one was too raunchy at all. Just a fun comedy, and one I go to a lot. So, had to mention my two favorite comedies of the last decade. Love them both. Now going into my top 25, I'm going to go through these pretty quick. My number 25 is going to be pretty controversial just because I don't think a lot of other people have this on their list. I love this movie. I loved the theatrical cut when I saw it. I love the director's cut even more, and in fact, that one I'm really going to talk about. But it is Batman v Superman. I know, not everybody's going to have this, and I'm probably the only one, but for me, I go to this movie a lot. I love this film, saw it in theaters, did not understand the hate for the movie. Was it perfect? No, but it wasn't the movie that the critics were panning. I love it. You know, it had my three favorite superheroes in it, or three of my favorites, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. I never thought we were going to have Wonder Woman on the big screen, and we did with this movie, and of course Wonder Woman came out, Justice League, which is a good movie, it's not on this list, but, you know, again, they introduced Wonder Woman, and I'm a big Zack Snyder fan. I thought he did such a great job with this. Besides some of the flaws, it is a great movie. The director's cut, though, for me, is an awesome film. Love that movie, and I feel like that should have been the one that they should have released in theaters. Love that movie. So, but yeah, Batman v Superman, not everybody's gonna have this movie on their list. Gosh, I can't talk. But for me, I love it. Number 24, again, not a movie that's gonna be on everybody's list, but I grew up with these movies. I thought this movie ended the saga really well, or the series really well. And of course, they've done, you know, their spin-off movies now. But that is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Part 1 was great. Really enjoyed that movie. And I remember finishing that movie in theaters, and the way they ended the movie, I wanted to see Part 2 right away. Took a year for it to come out, but when I saw the movie, I loved it. And I still love this movie. I went back and I rewatched it a couple years ago, and it holds up really well. So for me, it had to make my list. I love Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Let me get a drink of water real quick. Going on to number 23, another film that you might see on people's lists, but for me it's definitely on my list. I love this. The Dark Knight Rises. A great ending to Christopher Nolan's trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy. My favorite being The Dark Knight, this one being my second favorite, and Batman Begins being my third favorite, but a great beginning to one of my favorite trilogies. The Dark Knight Rises, despite some of the tragic things that happened when this movie came out, I'm talking about the shooting that happened in the theater, I love this movie. I think it's great, and I think it's underrated compared to a lot of other Christopher Nolan movies out there. Did not get a lot of love just because of that dark history with this film, but I think it still holds up well, and it's one of my favorite films of the last decade. So, The Dark Knight Rises, number 23. Number 22, another film that you probably won't see on everybody's list, but I love this movie. I've seen it 4 times now. Tron Legacy. Great movie here. I was late on the game with the Tron movies. I saw them back probably in 2015. The first one I really enjoyed. Second one I love. I wish I would have saw this in theaters because the effects are amazing and the visuals are stunning. You know, kind of some questionable CGI here and there, but for me, I love the movie, so it had to make my list. Number 21, sorry, need another drink of water. Number 21, you just saw it, Wonder Woman. Again, kind of like when I mentioned Batman v Superman, I was so happy to see Wonder Woman on the big screen, and this movie right here is fantastic. It's everything I wanted it to be and more. Had to make my top 25. Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, or Diana. Amazing. They picked such a great actress. I think she surprised everybody. She even surprised me a little bit, just because I didn't really know her too much. I knew she was in the Fast and the Furious movies, but this for me really made me a Gal fan. I love her. Love the cast. This movie was just perfect. It's one of the best superhero movies out there. One of the best movies of the last decade, in my opinion. And one of my favorite films from 2017. So, had to mention that one. I believe we're going on to 21. I'm just going to keep going. But 21 is going to be my first horror movie on this list. And one I saw 3 times in theaters. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I saw it each day, and that is You're Next. I had to mention this movie. So good. Underrated compared to a lot of horror movies from the past decade, but had to mention this one. Absolutely love that film. Number 20 is a movie that came out, I thought it was 2009, but I think 2010 is when the movie came out. Had to mention it. Black Swan with Natalie Portman. Great movie there. One of my favorites, and of course, one of the best of the last decade. Number 19, I love this film. I go to it quite a bit, like all these movies, but for me, this is, every time I watch it, I love it. You know, I loved it the first time I watched it. I still love the movie, and it still holds up really well. Great 2 leads, perfect cast, and my favorite David O. Russell movie, Silver Linings Playbook. Love that film. Going on to number 18. Number 18. Hopefully I'm doing it right. The Wolf of Wall Street. Watched this again the other night, and I love the movie. Absolutely love it. When I was thinking about this list again, I'm like, I had to mention this one because for me, it was even better another viewing. Like, the first time I saw this movie, I really enjoyed it. I watched it late at night. It's a long movie. Then I watched it again, and I love the film. So for me, it gets better with viewings. Had to mention this one on the list. Number 16, we're just going to keep going. Number 16, Carol. Again, another one I love. Saw this the first time, loved it, and I still love it now. So, big fan of that one, and I rewatch it every December. Number 15 is a film that's definitely not going to be on everybody's list, and it's just because no one talks about the movie. It's a shame because it is probably, in my opinion, her best role, and it's the movie that she deserved the Oscar win, and that is Jackie with Natalie Portman. Love that movie. Another one of my favorites, and again, no one talks about it. It's a shame. I think there was a lot of movies that came out that the year that this movie came out, and this one kind of got, you know, underlooked and no one really talks about it. But for me, Jackie is one of my favorites. Absolutely love that. Number 14 is Call Me By Your Name. I love all these movies, but for me, this was, you know, one I saw in theaters. Loved it then, still love it now. Perfect cast, perfect 2 leads, great story in my opinion. Cannot wait for the sequel. You know, it's a movie that doesn't need a sequel, but I would love to see where these characters are years later after the events of the first movie. Number 13, I believe it's 13. Hopefully it's 13. Avengers Endgame. Had to make my list. It was higher before I redid the list, but still had to make my list. I love this. This was the perfect superhero movie of last year, and one of the perfect superhero movies of the last decade. Absolutely love Avengers Endgame. What the Russo brothers have done with these Marvel movies is amazing. You know, of course, there's so many other directors. You know, Joss Whedon, who did a fantastic job introducing all these characters in one movie. Jon Favreau, another great director. But you know, the Russo brothers, they did such an amazing job with this movie and Infinity War, which is on my list, but I'm not going to tell you where it is yet. But yeah, Avengers Endgame, fantastic. Let's make sure I'm getting this right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, number 12. I kind of probably messed up. But number 12 is my next horror movie on the list, and one I had to mention. Part 2 is great. I think It Chapter 2 is great, but It Chapter 1 for me is the best one still. I rewatched them both several times. I think this is still the best one, and this one took me by surprise at how good it was, because sometimes with remakes or adaptations, they're hit and miss. This one was a hit. Love It Chapter 2, or not It. It Chapter 2 is great. Love It Chapter 1 though. The better of the two movies, and the one I had to mention. Number 11. We're just going to keep going. Number 11, Captain America, Winter Soldier. Another movie, again, I love them. I love all these movies. I'm going to say love a lot, so. But Winter Soldier, one of the best Marvel movies out there, and this was the film that we got to see the Russo brothers first take on, and the Russo brothers are amazing. This film is not only just a great Marvel movie, but a great movie in general. Great story. The movie that made me fall in love with Captain America. The first movie is good, but this one is definitely better. Civil War is great, but I think this is still the better movie. I kind of went back and forth for a while, but this is the better movie, rewatching them. But Winter Soldier, love that film. Alright, I think we're going into my top 10 movies now. Yes, top 10 movies. So this was hard because, again, not everybody is going to have these movies in their top 10, but for me, they definitely deserve to be there. Going into number 10, Inception, my second Christopher Nolan movie on this list. What's my other one? You'll find out soon. Inception, absolutely love this movie. Rewatched it twice recently, and this movie still holds up well, 20 years later. It's crazy this movie came out in 2010. But Inception, perfect cast, awesome Hans Zimmer score, as always. I love his scores, and the visuals are stunning. So it's a movie I go back and watch quite a bit. Number 9. Now this movie came out last year. This was my favorite film came out in 2018, I'm sorry. My favorite movie of 2018, and I know some people were like, how is this your favorite movie of 2018? It is. I just love it, and for me, it had to make my top 25 list, and in fact in my top 10. Star is Born. Love that movie. It is one of my favorite films. Every time I watch it, I still love it. Lady Gaga, Bradley Cooper, perfect in the movie. Great music, great chemistry between them. They are so amazing in this film together, but just on their own, they're amazing. Bradley Cooper, probably my favorite movie of his. Absolutely love him in this. And Lady Gaga was amazing in this film too. So, not only did she have to sing, but she had to act. And she proved it in American Horror Story, but really proved it here. Love this movie. Number 8, this movie, I've actually seen on some people's list, and I definitely have to agree. It is one of the best movies of the decade. Number 8 is Man of Steel. I saw this movie 4 times in theaters, and for me it is the best superhero, or not the best superhero movie, the best Superman movie out there. I love the Christopher Reeve movie, but this is my favorite. Henry Cavill as Superman / Clark Kent is amazing. The cast overall is perfect. I love them all. And I'm still hoping for a Man of Steel 2. We need that movie out. We need that movie this decade. But this film right here, I love it. So I had to mention that one, and it definitely had to be on my list. Number 7, a film that came out in 2012, Prometheus. I saw this in theaters. I loved it. I don't get the hate for this movie. It's not your typical alien movie. In fact, it's its own movie. It's connected in the universe, but it's its own movie. I still love this movie. I rewatched it last year, and I'm like, this film's fantastic. It's underrated compared to a lot of films that came out the last decade. and it's one of the best in my opinion. So, Prometheus, had to mention it. Now we're going into my number 6 favorite film of the last decade, and that is Mad Max Fury Road. Talk about a surprise for a film that came out that I really wasn't expecting to love as much, because I think the movie got pushed back a little bit. But when I saw the movie in theaters, man, I was so surprised. This film is fantastic. Saw it again in theaters. Saw it, I think, 2 or 3 times in theaters. Loved it each time. Loved the movie still. Amazing. And made me fall in love with Mad Max. So, Mad Max Fury Road. Awesome film. Now going into my top 5. These are movies that will probably surprise people. Not one of them, but the others, it might surprise people. My number 5 is my favorite LGBT film, my favorite gay theme film, and one of my favorite films, obviously, of the last decade, and just films in general. That is Free Fall. Now, if you love gay cinema, if you love LGBT cinema, LGBTQ cinema, Free Fall is the best one of the bunch, in my opinion. I love this film. I saw it on Netflix for the first time and fell in love with it instantly. I've seen the film maybe close to 10 times now, and it is hands down one of my favorite movies. You talk about a perfect, cast, a perfect 2 leads, perfect chemistry. I love these 2 actors, Max and Hano, I believe. But Free Fall, if you've not seen it, go out and watch it. It is just a really good movie in general, a fantastic film. Brokeback Mountain, this movie kind of got some stuff from that film, but I feel like this is the better of the films. Brokeback Mountain I love, hands down. It was one of my favorite films from the 2000s. This is one of my favorite films from the 2010s. But I think Free Fall is just amazing. So if you have not watched it, please go out and watch it. It is just an amazing film in general. So I love that movie. Number 4, and this might surprise people, but I love this movie so much, and again, saw it in theaters a few times, and I've loved it with each viewing, still love it now, and I love both cuts of the movie. You got the theatrical cut, and then you got this cut of the movie. That is X-Men Days of Future Past, both the theatrical and Rogue cut. I think they're both perfect. I love them both. I rewatched the theatrical cut this past year, and I rewatched it the other day. Love the movie so much. The Rogue cut I love too. I thought, adding the stuff back into the movie, the way they were talking about it, would not work. But Rogue is one of my favorite characters. I love Anna Paquin's Rogue. I know some people don't like her in the role, but I love her. And for me, adding her stuff back in the movie, it worked really well. It blended well within the story. Both cuts are perfect though, and hands down one of my favorites. I had to mention this movie. Had to be on my list. Love X-Men, the Rogue cut, or just X-Men Days of Future Past. Both cuts. Going into my top 3 favorite films. What are they? Well, number 3 is my favorite horror movie of the past decade. That is The Conjuring. I love The Conjuring too. Don't get me wrong. That is such a great movie. I think the first one's still better. I rewatched them recently. But The Conjuring, I still love this movie. I saw it in theaters. I loved it. Love Insidious did not make my list. It almost did. Did not, but I still love that film. Hands down, this is James Wan's probably better movie. Either that or Dead Silence from the 2010s. But The Conjuring is amazing. It's still one of my favorite ghost stories, one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite horror movies, and definitely one of the better movies of the last decade. Now going into my top 2, this was hard. This was actually really hard because I thought number 2 would be number 1, but I thought, no, my number 1 sticks where it is, but number 2 is Avengers Infinity War. Now, I thought Endgame, when I first saw that movie, was the better film of the 2. I rewatched this movie. It's still the better movie of the 2 films. As a whole, though, they're fantastic films altogether. But Infinity War, I remember when the Russo brothers were talking about this movie, and they were bringing all these characters into one film, all the characters from the Guardians and the Avengers universe. And I didn't think it was going to work, just because you had so many characters in the movie, which meant there was going to be so many plots, but it all worked so good. What the Russo brothers have been able to do with this, Avengers universe is amazing. This movie proves it. Also some of the other movies, but this movie proves it. I loved it, so absolutely love it. Still love it today. My number 2. And my final movie, my favorite film of the decade. This one is probably going to cause a little controversy, which, it is what it is. It's my favorite film. My favorite Christopher Nolan movie, yes. Well, I don't know. This or The Dark Knight. That one came out in 2010. Or no, 2000s. Sorry. But my favorite film from the last decade is Interstellar. The film I think I saw the most in theaters. I kid you not. I think I saw this movie 6 times. Never got old, still does not get old today. I just cherish this movie so much. I think it's very underrated, next to some of other Christopher Nolan's movies. And just a very underrated movie in general. I think people, if they don't love it now, I think they'll love it in the future. I think it's going to be a film more people will appreciate for sure. This movie kind of gets people like hit and miss. It's obviously a hit for me. I love Interstellar. The score is perfect, the cast is outstanding, the visuals are stunning, and this movie takes me by surprise. And every time I watch this film, I notice something new each time. So I love Interstellar. It is my favorite film from the last decade. And yeah, so that is going to be my top 25 plus some honorable mentions of my favorite films from the last decade. Hope you guys enjoyed my list. Let me know what you guys thought about it. Sorry about the tongue twisters. It happens all the time in my videos. But I wanted to share my top 25 before it got too late. I hope you guys enjoyed the list. Let me know what your top 25 is. Let me know what you guys thought about some of these movies. I know some of these films are going to get some head shaking going around. But it's my list. And everybody has their list. So, as always, you guys are awesome. You guys rock. In with the positive, out with the negative. And like always, go eat some Skittles. Alright, guys. Bye.